Thank you. Hebrews chapter number 11, we'll look at the end of the chapter, and we'll look at verse 39, verse 40, then read into Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And so when you get that, if you could join me in standing, and we are looking at this matter of you have a race to run. You do. Each and every one of us have a race to run. And the writer is helping us with that. And I am wanting to break this down in bite-sized sections so that we can take and digest this particular part. And I've preached from Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 and 3 and highlighted different things. But I want us to look at this matter of the race we have to run. And if you didn't get last week's message, you can pick that up on the podcast and you can hear the beginning of that when we're going to continue right along. In verse number 39 of chapter 11. And these all, and he went through a whole list of these all. Verse 39, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. Verse 40, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. You and I have a race to run. Let's talk about it some more. Thank you. Please be seated. No matter what is going on around us, we have to run the race that is before us. And he is talking about a matter of focus. He says in verse 1 of chapter 12, wherefore seeing. He says in verse 2, looking. And so it is a matter of sight. You've heard me say before, based upon what I learned when going through the motorcycle safety class many years ago, you steer where you stare. What you look at is vitally important as to what you will be doing. The success in running the race God has given to us, it does hinge upon our vision, upon our perception, upon our focus. And He gives us some motivations for running the race that is set before us. And these motivations are the message, the bulk of the message I want us to look at. Let me give you the three motivations that He gives to us right here in this passage. He says in verse 1, verse 1, I start at the very beginning. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. In verse 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame. And so the three motivations we have here is, first of all, looking back to the witnesses. He says in verse 1, we're compassed about, we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. So one motivation to running this race is to look at the witnesses. The next motivation is in verse 2, looking unto Jesus. So first of all, we're going to look around at these witnesses and see what significance they have to our running the race. And then second of all, we're going to look up unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Because if you don't find sufficient motivation in looking at the witnesses, I'm certain we're going to find it when we look unto Jesus. But it doesn't stop there. He teaches us in verse number 2 and following, look forward to the joy. Look forward to the joy that you will discover in running your race. Now, we're going to look at one motivation tonight. Looking back to the witnesses. The first motivation is to run the race of faith, and to do so by understanding that we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. And these witnesses are the people, I believe, that are described in chapter number 11. I don't think that these are necessarily witnesses like we would sometimes talk about, like in a wedding ceremony. We're gathered together today before God and these witnesses. I don't think it's that kind of witness. I don't think it's the kind of witness that you have when you go to the notary of the public. Some will come to Mrs. Autry, who's a notary, and she'll notarize, and they need a witness. That's not the kind of witness I believe he's talking about. When he says that these are witnesses here in chapter number 11 that are surrounding us, it's not them watching us, but rather I believe he's telling us to look at them. You can find motivation to run your race when you look at the cloud of witnesses that you're surrounded with, not so that they can watch you. You're not performing for the witnesses. God wants us to get some insight and to see the testimony of the witnesses that have gone on before us. And so he says, look unto these witnesses. Well, how can these witnesses encourage us? This is where we're going to find part of the motivation to run the race. Well, how? Well, one way that these witnesses of chapter 11 and others, because it covers an awful lot in chapter 11. You take every name in chapter 11, and then you're going to find, well, there's an awful lot more that he keeps it open, where it just covers a whole bulk, a whole multitude of unnamed witnesses. How can they motivate us? Two ways. They encourage us. These witnesses encourage us that we too can run our race. In other words, these witnesses, when we look to them the way I believe God is telling us to look into them, what we're going to find is we can run our race. You can run your race. Every one of us have a different kind of a race. Every one of us, because you have different challenges, you have different limitations, you have different giftings, you have different strengths and weaknesses, you're at different places in the journey. But all of us, we're going to have some struggles and some opposition, some difficulties, some trials. And the fact of the matter is, you and I can grow weary. You and I certainly can get weary. The Bible concedes to that. And we can get discouraged. We can even get defeated. Listen, the Bible admits that there's defeat that is possible in the Christian life, but the Bible never assumes that defeat is where we should live. What happens is many get discouraged running their race, and they get defeated in running their race, and then they get casual. We talked about this, we lose the urgency of the race, and that's why we need to look around to these witnesses to see we can run this race. See, we're running the race, and we look into this crowd and we realize that every one of these witnesses that are mentioned in chapter 11, well, they did it. They trusted God and they obeyed God with the race that was set before them. And we look and we see examples of faith. We see examples in their life of perseverance under every imaginable circumstance. Just look at it in chapter number 11. Even if you don't turn there, we start out with, in verse number 4, Abel. We can look to Abel, and we see Abel having offered a sacrifice that pleased God. What was it in his race? Well, God is emphasizing he had no self-trust in his sacrifice, no works of religion in his sacrifice. He had dependence upon God and offered to God what God required, and it pleased God. Right beside Abel, we can look, and you don't have to look far, and you're going to find Enoch. Enoch is one that simply was known for walking with God. Some folks are not known for their awesome feats, but just the quality of their personal life. Just walking with God. Just walking with God. You heard 2 testimonies about the Christ Walk Journal. What's the point of that? It's just trying to help people cultivate a walk with God. You don't have to look too far, and you see sitting close to him is Noah. Noah, having heard the command of God to do that which was ridiculous in the eyes of his neighbors, but he obeyed in simple faith, and he did so knowing that God had dealt with him and God had instructed him. And here's a man that was unpopular with the world, unpopular with society, but here is a man who pleased God because he in the work for God was trying and striving to please God and God alone, and it protected, it saved his family. That's the kind of men we need. We need fathers and husbands who are consumed with pleasing God and in so doing bring safety to their family. Oh, we don't have to look too much further, and there we see Abraham. Abraham is there with Sarah, his wife. The promise given to them that was totally, completely unreasonable by human understanding of physiology. But when God persisted in His promise, you know what they did? They eventually believed. That great old saint, Abraham, he left the land of his fathers. He went out to a land whose location he did not even know. And he did not even demand that God give him a map or explain to him turn-by-turn directions. Why? Because Abraham trusted God. And that's the attitude of a spiritual champion. Close by is David. David committed adultery and murder, but you know what? He finished his race. How about John the Baptist? Had a weird personality. I think he was an evangelist that became a pastor. He had a weird personality, but the Bible teaches he finished his race. How about John Mark? He was a quitter, but he finished. Mary the prostitute is mentioned, but she finished. Job, who suffered so much, but he finished. Stephen was hated and he was stoned, but he finished. And now it comes time for you. You run your race by the same power, by the same confidence in the exact same God that never changes. And you too can finish your race and not just cross the finish line, not just cross having accomplished and having just succeeded, but finishing in victory, finishing with the victor's reward. That's the first way these witnesses motivate us. They motivate us because they tell us you too can do it. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter your obstacle. It doesn't matter your weakness, because it's not about you. It's about God, and it's about the one who put you into the race. Look unto Him. But before you do that, look unto the witnesses. They're simply saying you can do it. But they're also motivating us in another way. Not just letting us know that we too can do it, but they're letting us know that we have something better. Look at chapter 11 and verse 39 and verse 40. In my mind, and flying back on the plane today, I was sitting there, I was thinking, what I need to do is after having worked on this, I need to sit down with Dr. Childs and I need to run this by him and get his thoughts on it, but I didn't get a chance to do it, so here's my stab at this. Verse number 1, chapter number 12, says, wherefore. The wherefore, verse 1, points us back to a motivation that he makes at the end of chapter 11. And part of that is found in verse 39 and 40. Notice again verse 39 of chapter 11. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith. But notice what it says. They didn't receive the promise. They received not the promise. Verse 40, God having provided some better thing for us. Not them, but us. That they without us should not be made perfect. Now, he's giving us another motivation in looking unto the witnesses. We look unto the witnesses, they're telling you and they're telling me, we did it, you can do it by faith. Same God, yesterday, today, and forever. Look unto the same God. We look to the witnesses and they tell us you too can do it. But they also are motivating us, these witnesses, because of the emphasis that we have something better. And that comes to us because the saints of old did not receive what was promised. What is this something better? How is it better for us? What is better for us because they didn't get what was promised? You see that in verse 39? I want to make sure we're together. We got all the cables hooked up together. We're cooking, right? Okay. Verse 39. What is the better? How is it better for us that they didn't get what was promised? I think the answer to that is in verse number 40, where it says that they without us should not be made perfect. And the wording here makes it kind of tricky. And so what he's saying is that they will be made perfect, complete, but they will not be made complete without us. All right? We say amen? We don't know what we're amening though. So in other words, what he's talking about is the final, the being made perfect, the complete, the final perfected salvation of all saints who've gone on before. They will be made perfect. They will be made complete in that they will know a resurrection body someday. They will know the reign of Jesus on the new earth, the restoration of all things. But this they will not know without all the runners finishing the race. See, they finished their race and they got a ribbon. They finished their race, but they didn't get the gold cup. They finished their race and now they circle us. And they finished the race and now they're on the sidelines of a marathon waiting for us. And the emphasis is because God says no one is going to get the glory of final perfection. No one's going to find complete, total salvation. And the salvation that is in the future, we have the different tenses of salvation. We were saved, we are being saved, and we will completely be saved in the future. But that's not going to happen until all have finished the race. And they will not be made perfect without us. So verse 40 is a great appeal. And his great appeal, it merges into an application. Run your race. So in verse 40 he says that God, having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. So these Old Testament saints, they're saints. They got saved the same way that we get saved. They didn't get saved a different way. They're saved the same way. Sometimes people would say, well, they were under law, we're under grace. Dr. Childs would say it, I heard it preached in class, because when he taught, he preached. And he preached, it was always grace. It's always been an age of grace. And so yet, however, the Old Testament saints, they only had shadows. We have substance. They had good things. We have something better. And the difference is in that old covenant, what they had, and the new that we have. The difference is the mediator between God and man. It's the man Christ Jesus. They in faith looked forward. We in faith look back. The writer of Hebrews is now making an appeal to us, and this appeal merges, right as I said, into an application, a forceful, powerful application. The appeal is we've got something better. This applies what we've been looking at here in chapter number 11, if we've read all of chapter number 11. And now he's got an application with great leverage and great power. And the application is this of chapter 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. What he's saying is, because we have something better, because we know the someone of the new covenant, because we are running our race and we are looking forward to that final completion, he says, go on, run your race, go on, run your race, never go back, keep going on, Keep pressing on. Run the race. Fight to persevere in love. Fight to persevere in faith and obedience. And that's the first motivation. Look back to the witnesses who've gone on before us. They finished their course, and so can you. Look back to these witnesses, all the saints with longing and excitement for us to finish the race. They did so. They ran their race by faith and obedience. Let us too run our race in faith and obedience. So lay aside the weights and run. Lay aside the sin and run. And don't look back. And don't let up. Don't go into coast mode. Don't get casual about your relationship with God. Don't get to a point where you slide or you as Hebrews talks about, you drift. Don't get into this drifting. Drift with the current. Drift with society's winds. Drift with how you get response. Don't do that. Jesus, who never changes, which comes to us in chapter number 13, the same yesterday, today, and forever. So run your race. Look unto the witnesses, and we'll look at in weeks to come, looking unto Jesus. Let's stand together, please.